The motion light tripped at 1:47 a.m. I know because I was already awake, sitting at the workbench in the garage bay with a soldering iron in my hand, reattaching a corroded terminal on the southern perimeter sensor. Grandpa Earl had me running maintenance every Tuesday and Friday night. Had been for 6 years, since I was 14, and he first showed me the drawings. The light was the eastern flood, the one covering the tree line past the gravel turnout. I set down the iron and checked the monitor. Deer, probably. We got mule deer wandering through the motion zone constantly. But the screen showed nothing. Just the gravel, the first 30 feet of grass, and the black wall of Douglas fir beyond. Then the second light tripped. Western perimeter, opposite side of the property. I stood up. 2 sensors, opposite vectors, within 4 seconds of each other. That wasn't wildlife. That was a pattern. I reached for the handheld radio on the bench and pressed transmit. Earl, east and west floods just triggered. Simultaneous. The radio clicked. 3 seconds of silence. Then his voice, graveled and low. Come to the house, now. Don't run. I didn't run. But I walked fast enough that the cold Oregon air burned in my throat. The house was 60 yards from the garage bay, and I covered it, watching the tree lines on both sides, seeing nothing but feeling the skin on my neck prickle like someone had drawn a wire across it. Earl was standing in the kitchen when I came through the mudroom door. He was dressed, boots laced, jacket on. That stopped me cold. He slept in thermals and wool socks. I'd never seen him dressed at this hour. Get your mother and Cass up, he said. Tell them shoes and coats, nothing else. What triggered? I don't know. His eyes moved to the window over the sink, and I saw something I'd never seen there before. Fear. Not the controlled wariness he brought to every system check, every perimeter walk. This was animal. His hands weren't shaking, but they were still in a way that meant he was forcing them to be. I don't know what it is, he said again, and that's why I need everyone vertical. Now. I went upstairs. Mom was in the second bedroom. She'd been staying with us since the divorce finalized in March, sharing the room with my younger sister, Cassidy. I knocked once and opened the door. Mom, get up. Earl wants everyone downstairs. She sat up immediately. 8 months living with Earl had trained the delay out of her. What time is it? Almost 2. Cass, wake up. Cassidy was 16 and slept like the dead. I shook her ankle through the quilt, and she groaned, pulled away. Shoes and coats, I said. Downstairs, hurry. By the time we reached the kitchen, Earl had the perimeter tablet open on the table. All 8 sensors displayed green, no current triggers. But the log showed the 2 eastern hits, and the single western hit clearly. Time-stamped, unambiguous. Could be nothing, he said, not looking at us. Could be someone scouting the property. Could be an animal large enough to hit 2 zones in sequence. At the same time, on opposite sides, I said. He looked at me. The fear was still there, but now it had company. Something harder. Decision. I'm opening the cellar, he said. Mom set her hand on the counter. Earl? I know what I said. I know what I swore. He picked up the tablet, folded its case closed. But I built that thing for the night. I couldn't explain what was coming. And I cannot explain what's coming. So we go down. We wait until daylight. If it's nothing, we come back up, and I'll buy breakfast in town. Cassidy, still half asleep, looked at me. What cellar? The cellar was not a cellar. 6 years earlier, when I was 14 and still spending every summer at Earl's property outside Roseburg, He'd taken me to the lower meadow with a tape measure and a bundle of wooden stakes. We spent 3 days measuring, marking, arguing about grade angles and load calculations. On the 4th day, he handed me a shovel and said, "This stays between us. Not your mother, not Cassidy, nobody." I dug with him for 2 weeks before the first concrete truck arrived. What we built, what he designed, and I helped pour, frame, wire, and seal over the next 4 summers was a hardened shelter rated for what Earl called the next one. He meant nuclear. He'd been Army Corps of Engineers during the Cold War, stationed in Germany during the late 60s, when every briefing he attended assumed the missiles were already airborne. He came home in 71 and spent 50 years waiting for the flash. The bunker was designed to survive a nuclear exchange. 14-inch reinforced walls, HEPA filtration rated for radiological particulate, sealed water recirculation, Faraday-caged electrical systems, a blast door rated for 15 PS1 overpressure. It was engineered for radiation, for fallout, for the specific atmospheric and thermal characteristics of nuclear war. It was not, and I knew this better than anyone alive, because I'd helped install every system designed for a biological threat that walked up to your door and tried to open it. The ventilation intakes were ground level. The filtration system drew exterior air. The blast door was designed to resist pressure waves, not persistent physical force from multiple vectors. The escape tunnel exited into a drainage culvert 300 yards south. Concealed, yes, but not defended. I knew all of this as Earl led us across the backyard in the dark, past the workshop and the cold frame garden, to the angled concrete entrance set into the hillside behind a screen of rhododendron. I knew it the way you know a building you framed with your own hands. Every joint, every compromise, every place where the budget ran out or the engineering assumptions didn't quite match. Earl keyed the outer lock mechanical, not electronic, and pulled the steel outer door open on its hydraulic arms. The smell of sealed concrete and stored air rolled out. He'd been running the dehumidifier. I could hear its hum from inside. "Down the stairs," he said. "Grab the rail. Lights are on a delay." Mom went first, holding Cassidy's hand. Cass was awake now, fully awake, and looking at me with the expression of someone who's just realized she's been excluded from something enormous. "You knew about this?" she whispered as she passed me. "Yeah." "For how long?" 6 years. She stared at me, and in the blue-white wash of the stairwell lights clicking on, I could see that something shifted between us. Not anger, exactly. Betrayal is the wrong word, too. Something more like the realization that the person you thought you knew had been someone else the entire time. I followed her down. Earl came last, pulling the outer door shut and throwing the interior bolts, 3 of them, manual, sequential. Then the inner door, which was the real barrier. 8 inches of steel-reinforced concrete faced with 1/4-inch plate. He sealed it, spun the locking wheel, and stepped back. We were in. "How long has this been here?" Mom asked. She was standing in the main room, turning slowly, taking in the cots, the water drums, the food stores on their wire shelving, the electrical panel, the radio stack. "Long enough," Earl said. "Sit down. I'm going to check the surface cameras." He moved to the monitoring station, 3 screens, hardwired to cameras I'd helped mount on the house eaves and the garage roofline. He powered them on, and we waited for the feeds to load. The eastern camera showed nothing. The western camera showed nothing. The northern camera, covering the driveway approach, showed a shape standing motionless at the edge of the gravel, 40 feet from the house. A person, standing still, facing the house, not moving. "Earl," I said, "I see it." We watched the figure for 11 minutes. It didn't shift its weight, didn't look around, didn't move its arms, just stood there, facing the house, as though it had walked to that exact spot and switched off. Homeless? Mom offered. Confused? At 2 in the morning? In the middle of 5 private acres with no road access from that direction? Earl's voice was flat, not dismissive processing. He zoomed the camera. The resolution was poor in night mode, but I could make out enough. A man, maybe middle-aged, dark clothing, no visible bag or pack. His posture was wrong. Humans shift. Humans look around. This figure was locked, like someone had paused a video. "I'm going to try the radio," Earl said. He moved to the communication station, a setup I'd helped install 3 summers ago. Ham rig, scanner, shortwave receiver. He powered the scanner first and began cycling through emergency frequencies. For the first 2 minutes, static, dead air. Then, on a county emergency channel, a dispatcher's voice. Clipped, professional. But underneath the training, something vibrating. "All units, code black, repeat code black. Do not approach subjects on foot. Maintain vehicle distance minimum 50 feet. Subjects are not responsive to verbal commands. Do not engage without..." The transmission cut. Returned. A different voice now. "Confirmed cases in Grants Pass, Medford, Roseburg city limits. National Guard activation pending. All civilian traffic restricted on I-5 between..." Earl turned the volume down. He looked at me. Not at Mom, not at Cassidy, at me. "This isn't what I built for," he said quietly. "I know. The intakes. I know." Mom stood up from the cot. "What does that mean? What about the intakes?" Earl ran his hand over his face. In the fluorescent light, he looked every one of his 74 years. This shelter was designed for nuclear fallout. The air system filters particulate dust, ash, radiological material. It draws air from outside through ground-level vents and scrubs it clean. So if what's out there isn't radiation, if it's people walking around, capable of finding those vents. He looked at the ceiling. They could hear the fans. They could block the intakes. They could... He stopped. "They could get to us through the air system," I finished. Cassidy pulled her knees up on the cot. "So, we're not safe down here." Earl sat down heavily on the bench beside the radio. "We're safe right now. The intakes are screened and baffled. Nothing's getting in through them. But if enough of whatever's out there crowds those vents, they could restrict airflow, collapse the screens by weight alone, and we'd suffocate before we starved." The room was silent, except for the hum of the dehumidifier and the faint whisper of the filtration fans, a sound I'd always found comforting. Now it sounded like breathing, like the bunker itself drawing air through a narrowing throat. "How long before that's a problem?" Mom asked. "Could be never," Earl said. "Could be days. Depends on how many are up there. Depends on whether they're drawn to sound." He looked at the monitor again. The figure hadn't moved. "Depends on what they are." I sat down at the workbench. Every bunker has one. And Earl's was meticulous. Tools racked, materials sorted, spare parts cataloged. I'd organized half of it myself. And sitting there, looking at the ventilation schematic pinned to the corkboard above the bench, I understood something Earl wouldn't say in front of Mom and Cassidy. This bunker was a masterpiece built for the wrong apocalypse. Every dollar, every hour, every calculation optimized for a threat that delivered its damage in the first 30 seconds and then decayed. Not for a threat that could stand at your door and wait. We weren't hiding in a fortress. We were hiding in a beautiful, brilliant, fatally mismatched machine. By dawn, there were 7 of them. The cameras showed them arriving singly throughout the remaining dark hours. Each one walked to the property from a different direction and stopped. Not clustered, not communicating, just distributed across the visible area like pins stuck in a map by someone who didn't understand patterns. 1 near the workshop, 1 at the edge of the garden, 2 on the driveway, 3 more scattered in the grass between the house and the tree line. They didn't interact with each other. They didn't approach the structures. They stood and faced generally inward, toward the center of the property, and remained still. "They're not aggressive," Mom said, watching the screens. "They're just standing." "For now," Earl said. I was under the ventilation access panel with a flashlight and a wrench, tracing the intake ductwork. The system drew air through 4 ground-level intakes, 2 on the east hillside, 2 on the west. Each intake was a 12-inch galvanized pipe fitted with a mesh screen and rain hood, concealed under brush. They were invisible unless you knew what to look for. But they weren't silent. The fans created negative pressure that produced a faint whistle at the intake openings, barely audible at ground level during the day, but in the dead quiet of early morning, maybe enough. "Earl," I called from under the panel, "what's the minimum airflow we need for 4 people?" He didn't answer immediately. I heard him moving from the monitoring station to the environmental controls, a panel I'd helped wire, labeled in his precise draftsman's hand. At rest, 12 cubic feet per minute, but the CO2 scrubber needs 20 to cycle efficiently. Below that, the lithium hydroxide canisters work overtime, and we burn through them twice as fast. And if I close 2 of the 4 intakes? You have the draw. The fans compensate by pulling harder on the remaining 2, which increases the whistle. You solve one problem and create another. I slid out from under the panel and sat up. Cassidy was watching me from her cot, hugging her knees. "Can you fix it?" she asked. "There's nothing broken," I said. "That's the problem. It's working exactly as designed. It's just designed for the wrong thing." Earl came and stood over me. He had his arms crossed, and in his face I could see the expression I'd learned to recognize over 6 years of building together, the look of an engineer confronting a limitation he'd chosen not to address. "I thought about it," he said quietly. "Back in the design phase, biological scenarios. I thought about sealed recirculation, but the cost the CO2 management alone would have tripled the budget. And I was 70 years old with a finite pension. I built for what I believed was most likely. You built for nukes." "I built for nukes, and I was wrong." There was no accusation in my voice, and he knew it. I'd been there for every decision. I'd seen the spreadsheets, the trade-off matrices, the long evenings where he weighed one system against another, with the ruthlessness of a man who knew his money would run out before his fears did. I'd never questioned the nuclear assumption because it was his assumption, and he was the engineer, and I was 14. But I wasn't 14 anymore, and the 7 figures standing motionless in his yard were not fallout. "Okay," I said, "so we adapt. What do we have?" Earl pulled a folding chair to the workbench and sat. For the next hour, while Mom made instant coffee on the bunker's propane burner and Cassidy listened from her cot, we inventoried 4 ventilation intakes. 2 could be sealed internally without tools, butterfly valves I'd installed the summer I was 17, at Earl's insistence, as emergency shutoffs. The other 2 required access from outside. 1 escape tunnel, 300 yards south, exiting into a concrete drainage culvert beneath a logging road. The tunnel was 3 feet in diameter, unlit with no internal locks designed for egress only. 1 blast door, The entrance we'd used. 8 inches of reinforced concrete. Steel-faced. Rated for overpressure, not for sustained physical assault, but practically nothing human was getting through it with bare hands. The weakness was the ventilation. It was always going to be the ventilation. What if we go full sealed? I asked. Close all 4 intakes, run on stored air, and manage CO2 with the canisters? Earl did the math on the back of a food inventory sheet. 4 people at rest, minimal exertion. We get approximately 41 hours before CO2 reaches dangerous levels, assuming the canisters are at full capacity. He checked the storage rack. 14 canisters, each rated for 12 hours of scrubbing at standard draw. He paused. But without airflow across them, efficiency drops. Call it 8 hours per canister in sealed mode. That gives us 112 hours, 4.5 days. If we're disciplined, if no one panics, if we stay still. 4.5 days, sealed in a concrete box, breathing recycled air that got thinner with every hour. Or we keep the intakes open and hope 7 motionless figures never notice the whistle. Neither option was survivable long term. Both were buying time. The question was what we were buying it for. By noon, the figure count on the cameras had risen to 12, and they'd begun to move. Not toward anything, not with apparent purpose. But the frozen stillness of the early hours had given way to a slow, arrhythmic drift. They shifted positions, turned, walked a few steps in one direction, stopped, walked back, like sleepwalkers caught between dreams. The radio, meanwhile, had become a graveyard of fragments. The county emergency frequency was dead just carrier tone. The state emergency broadcast played a 30-second loop instructing residents to shelter in place and await National Guard contact. Ham frequencies carried scattered voices, panicked, overlapping, contradicting each other. One signal came through clearly. A man broadcasting from somewhere in the Umpqua Valley, calm and methodical. They don't respond to sound below 40 decibels at distances greater than 20 meters. They respond to vibration through ground contact. They respond to concentrated CO2 exhalation at close range. They do not appear to see well in daylight, but are significantly more mobile after dark. Repeat. Earl wrote it down. Every word. CO2, I said. He looked up. They respond to CO2. Our exhaust vent outputs CO2-enriched air. It's a 10-inch pipe venting on the west hillside. Earl set down his pencil. The color in his face changed. The scrubber removes some, he said. But not all. Not at rest state operation. The exhaust carries elevated CO2 regardless. We're broadcasting ourselves. He stood up and walked to the environmental controls. His hands moved over the panel, checking gauges, flow rates, output temperatures. Then he stopped and pressed both palms flat against the wall beside the panel. "I'm sorry," he said. It was the first time in 6 years of building together that I'd heard those words from him. Not because he was proud, because in his mind, the work itself was the apology. Every improvement, every upgrade, every late-night refining a system was his way of saying, "I'm trying to make this right." The verbal admission meant he'd found something he couldn't fix with labor. "Don't," I said. "We can work this." "How?" I was already at the workbench, pulling the ventilation schematic off the corkboard. The exhaust vent. It's a straight run 20 feet of duct, then 90-degree elbow, then vertical rise to the surface outlet. What if we extend it? Run it into the escape tunnel? Earl turned. The tunnel vents into the culvert 300 yards south. Exactly. We redirect our CO2 exhaust 300 yards away from us. The things up there follow the plume south to the culvert opening, not to our intakes. He stared at the schematic. I could see him running the engineering in his head: duct diameter, flow rates, back pressure calculations. "We don't have 300 yards of ductwork," he said. "No, but we have the tunnel itself. If I seal the connection between the shelter and the tunnel at the shelter end, and open a port from the exhaust system into the tunnel cavity, the tunnel becomes the duct, the whole thing. 300 yards of existing concrete tube already ventilating at the far end." Earl pulled the schematic from my hands and spread it on the bench. His pencil moved. Angles, pressures, volumes. "Back pressure increases," he muttered. "Fan load goes up. Power consumption rises." "Can the system handle it?" More calculation. Then, yes, marginally. We lose about 15% efficiency on the intake side due to the increased exhaust resistance, but it's within tolerance. Then we do it. He looked at me, really looked. And in that look, I saw something I'd been waiting 6 years to see, without knowing I was waiting for it. He wasn't checking my work. He wasn't evaluating my suggestion against his superior knowledge. He was looking at me the way one engineer looks at another when the solution is sound and the time is now. "We'll need to enter the tunnel from inside," he said. "The access point is behind the storage wall." "I know. I framed that wall." "Yes," he said. "You did." The tunnel access was a 2-foot square steel hatch set into the bunker's south wall, hidden behind a rack of water drums. Earl and I moved the drums while Mom and Cassidy staged tools wrenches, duct tape, a battery drill, a portable work light. The hatch hadn't been opened since we'd sealed it during final construction. The bolts resisted. 4 years of stillness had bonded them to their seats. I worked them with penetrating oil and a breaker bar, one by one, until the hatch swung inward on hinges that screamed in the enclosed space. The tunnel beyond was exactly as I remembered, from the day we'd poured its final section, a corrugated steel culvert, 36 inches in diameter, stretching into darkness. The air inside was stale but breathable. Cool, slightly damp. "I'll go," I said. "I need to assess the connection point and figure out where to port the exhaust duct." "Take the radio," Earl said, "and the CO2 monitor." I took both, plus the work light and a roll of aluminum tape. Then I entered the tunnel on my hands and knees. 300 yards in a 36-inch tube is a long crawl. The light bounced off corrugated steel in repeating waves, creating a disorienting illusion of zero progress. I counted sections. Each corrugation panel was 4 feet long, 75 panels to the end. At panel 40, I stopped. The CO2 monitor was reading ambient, nothing elevated. Good. That meant the current exhaust wasn't bleeding into the tunnel. The systems were still separate. At panel 60, I heard it. A sound from ahead, from the tunnel's exit. A scraping. Rhythmic. Not mechanical, organic. Something dragging across concrete. I killed the work light. Darkness closed around me like a hand. The scraping continued, grew louder, then stopped. Silence. My breathing sounded enormous in the tube. Then, a wet exhale. Close. Closer than I'd expected. The CO2 monitor flickered, the reading jumped. Something was breathing into the tunnel's exit. The culvert opening at the far end was uncapped, designed as an emergency exit, not a sealed system. And something had found it. I lay in the dark, face down, in a 3-foot tube, listening to whatever was at the other end, breathing into my escape route. The radio was pressed to my chest. I keyed it, volume at minimum. "Earl." His voice came back immediately, barely audible. "Go. Something's at the south exit, in the culvert. I can hear it breathing. 3 seconds of silence. Then, how close? 15 panels. 60 feet maybe. Is it entering? I listened. The breathing was there. Steady, but no scraping. No forward movement. It was at the opening. Facing in. Smelling. Not yet. But Earl, if I poured our exhaust into this tunnel, we're piping concentrated CO2 directly toward it. We'd be feeding it a trail straight back to us. The silence on the radio lasted longer this time. I could feel him recalculating. Everything we'd planned in the last hour, dismantled by a single presence at an exit we'd assumed was clear. "Come back," he said. "Now, quietly." I turned in the tube, a maneuver that required me to flatten entirely and rotate on my stomach, and began crawling back. 75 panels, 4 feet each. 300 yards of dark tube with something breathing at one end and 4 people sealed at the other. The tunnel wasn't an ascent. It was another opening, another vulnerability in a system riddled with assumptions that no longer held. I reached the hatch, pulled myself through, and Earl sealed it behind me. He didn't ask what I'd heard. He could see it in my face. "We need a different solution," I said. "Yes," he said. "We do." The afternoon was a siege of mathematics. Not the dramatic kind, no shouting, no arguments. Just Earl and me at the workbench, running numbers that kept coming back wrong, while Mom monitored the cameras and Cassidy inventoried every item in the shelter by category and quantity. The problem was now tripled. The intakes whistled and attracted attention. The exhaust vented CO2 and attracted attention. The escape tunnel had been discovered and compromised. 3 vectors of vulnerability in a system designed with none, because the system was never supposed to face anything that could hear or smell or walk toward a sound. "What if we go passive?" I asked. "Shut down the ventilation entirely. No fans, no intake draw, no exhaust output. Go fully sealed and rely on the canisters." 4.5 days, Earl repeated. "What happens in 4.5 days? Either we open up or we die. Then we need to know, what's the situation going to look like in 4.5 days? We returned to the radio. The ham frequencies were thinning fewer voices each hour. But the methodical broadcaster from the Umpqua Valley was still transmitting every 90 minutes, updating his observations. Day activity is minimal. They congregate near structures, but do not attempt entry during daylight hours. After sunset, behavior shifts significantly. They become mobile, aggressive, and responsive to sound at much greater distances. Overnight is when they breach. Repeat. Overnight is when they breach. "So they're more dangerous at night," Mom said from the monitoring station. "But during the day, they just stand there?" "That matches what we're seeing," I said. The camera feeds showed our 12 visitors still drifting aimlessly in the yard. None had approached the house. None had shown interest in the bunker entrance or the intake vents yet. "If they're passive during daylight," I said, "then daylight is our window." Earl understood immediately. "You want to go up?" "I want to modify the intakes from outside. We can't solve this from in here. The system needs physical changes to the surface components, extend the intake pipes vertically, get them above ground level, above head height, reduce the whistle by flaring the openings, and cap the exhaust vent with a diffuser to spread the CO2 plume over a wider area so it doesn't concentrate." "You want to go outside," Mom said, "with those things in the yard." "During the day, when they're passive." "They're passive now. You don't know they'll stay passive if someone walks out there." She was right. But the alternative was sitting in a sealed box counting hours until the air went bad. "Earl," I said, What's your read? He was studying the camera feeds. 12 figures, none near the bunker entrance. The closest was the one by the workshop, maybe 70 yards from the hillside hatch. If you go at midday, he said slowly, maximum daylight. Take the modifications pre-assembled so you minimize time on the surface. In and out. 20 minutes. 15, I said. I know where everything is. Cassidy stood up from her inventory. I'll go with you. No. You need someone watching while you work. You can't modify vents and watch your back at the same time. Cass, I'm not useful down here. I've counted every can of food and every roll of toilet paper. I can stand outside and watch. That's something I can do. I looked at Earl. He looked at Cassidy. And I saw him do something I'd never seen defer to someone other than himself. She's right, he said. You need a spotter, but you take the radio. And if anything moves towards you, anything at all, you come back. You don't finish the work. You don't grab one more tool. You come back. Okay? Both of you. Okay? Mom sat down on her cot and didn't say anything. Her silence was louder than any objection. We prepped for 3 hours. Earl and I built the modifications at the workbench, 2 intake pipe extensions fashioned from sections of galvanized duct I'd stored in the shelter's maintenance supplies. Each was a 4-foot vertical riser with a wide mouth flare at the top, designed to reduce intake velocity and eliminate the whistle. For the exhaust, we built a diffuser cap, a wide cone that would spread the output over a 30-foot radius instead of concentrating it in a single plume. We staged everything by the entrance hatch, tools in a belt, modifications pre-cut and labeled, hardware in a pouch. Cassidy wore a dark jacket, had her hair pulled back, carried the radio and a pair of binoculars Earl kept in the emergency kit. At noon, Earl checked the cameras one final time. 11 figures visible. 1 had moved out of camera range. The closest was still the one by the workshop, now sitting on the ground, motionless, legs straight out in front of it like a discarded mannequin. Go, Earl said. 15 minutes. Not 1 second more. He opened the inner door, then the outer. Daylight fell down the stairwell gray, overcast, cool. October air carrying the smell of rain and something else. Something faintly sweet and wrong. I went up first. The rhododendron screening the entrance was undisturbed. I pushed through the branches and emerged onto the hillside. The property spread below me. House, garage, workshop, garden dotted with still figures like forgotten sculptures. Cassidy came up behind me. Her breath caught when she saw them. Don't look at their faces, I said. Watch their feet. If their feet move, you tell me. Okay? Her voice was steady, thin but steady. The eastern intakes were closest 50 yards downhill along the tree line. I moved fast, staying low, carrying the risers under one arm and the tool belt over my shoulder. Cassidy followed 3 paces behind, turning every few seconds to scan. The first intake was exactly where I remembered a galvanized pipe stub rising 6 inches above ground level, hidden under a laurel bush. I knelt, loosened the rain hood, and began fitting the riser extension. The wrench slipped once on the dewy metal, and I caught it before it hit anything. 2 of them just turned, Cassidy whispered. I froze. Toward us? No, toward the house. They're looking at the house. I resumed working, the riser seated. I tightened the band clamp, fitted the flared top, sealed the joint with aluminum tape. 4 minutes, 1 down. We moved to the second eastern intake. 15 yards farther along the hill. Same procedure. Loosen, extend, seal. Cassidy's breathing had quickened, but her voice stayed level. The one by the workshop just stood up. I looked. It had risen from its sitting position and was now facing vaguely east our direction, but not precisely. Its head was tilted slightly upward, as though scenting the air. Is it moving? Not yet. I finished the second intake. 5 minutes elapsed. 2 down. Now the west side, which required crossing behind the bunker entrance and traversing 60 yards of exposed hillside. Cass, west side. She nodded. We moved. Crossing the open ground felt like swimming through voltage. Every step exposed, every second watched by things that might or might not be watching back. The western intakes were buried deeper in brush, harder to find, harder to access. I located the first by memory and feel, pulling aside blackberry canes that tore at my sleeves. 9 minutes, Cassidy said, checking her watch. I worked faster, riser, clamp, tape. The third intake sealed. 1 remaining, plus the exhaust vent. The fourth intake was 10 yards farther west, near the drainage swale. I found it, knelt, and then Cassidy's hand closed on my shoulder. It's walking. I looked up. The figure by the workshop, the one that had stood, was moving. Not fast, not toward us exactly, but moving, drifting across the yard in a slow arc that would, if continued, bring it closer to the western hillside. How fast? Slow, like it's sleepwalking. How long until it's a problem? Maybe 3 minutes at that pace. I made a decision. I left the fourth intake. 3 out of 4 modified was enough to reduce the whistle significantly. The exhaust diffuser could wait. We'd spent 11 minutes on the surface. Back, I said. Now. We moved. Not running at tracks. Walking fast, controlled, back along the hillside toward the rhododendron screen. The figure in the yard continued its arc, indifferent or unaware. We reached the entrance, down the stairs. Earl pulled the doors shut behind us. Bolts thrown, sealed. I leaned against the wall and breathed. 3 out of 4, I said. The exhaust is still exposed. Earl nodded. Tomorrow? Yeah, tomorrow. That night, the cameras showed us what darkness did. The 12 figures we'd watched drift passively through daylight, transformed after sunset. Not physically, their bodies didn't change, didn't mutate, didn't sprout anything new. But their behavior shifted so completely, it might as well have been a different species. They moved with direction, with intent. They crossed the property in purposeful lines, pausing at structures, pressing against walls, testing windows. One of them found the garage bay door and pushed against it rhythmically, not pounding, not frantic, just a steady mechanical pressure, like a tide. Another found the workshop and circled it, twice, 3 times, then moved on to the house and did the same. They're mapping, Earl said. They're learning the property. You're attributing cognition. I'm describing what I see. They're circling structures and moving on. That's search behavior. By midnight, one of them was on the hillside. We watched it on the northern camera, just the edge of its silhouette moving uphill toward the bunker entrance. It walked directly, not drifting. It reached the rhododendron screen and stopped. It can't see the door, I said. The branches cover it completely. It doesn't need to see it, Earl said. Listen. He turned up the environmental panel's audio monitor, a microphone mounted on the outer door for exactly this purpose. Through it, we could hear the faint, rhythmic whistle of the one unmodified intake vent. The fourth one. The one I hadn't reached. The figure on the hillside turned its head. Slowly, then began walking along the slope toward the sound. "It's going to find the intake," I said. "Yes." We watched. The camera lost it as it moved beyond frame. The hillside vents were outside the coverage angle. But the audio monitor told us everything. Footsteps on loose ground. A pause. Then a sound that raised the hair on my arms, hands on metal. Fingers exploring the lip of the intake pipe. Then a mouth, pressed to the opening, breathing into it. Long, wet exhales pushed directly into our air supply. "Shut it down," Mom said from behind us. "Shut that vent, now." I was already at the environmental panel. The butterfly valve for the fourth intake, the only one without the riser extension, the only one still at ground level, could be closed from inside. I grabbed the valve handle and cranked it shut. The whistling stopped. The airflow dropped. On the audio monitor, we heard the figure at the vent make a sound, not a moan, not a scream, but a low, guttural exhalation of something that might have been frustration. Then nothing. Earl checked the flow gauges. 3 intakes operational, 4th sealed. We're at 73% airflow capacity. CO2 scrubber efficiency drops, canister life shortened. We now have approximately 60 hours of sustainable air before levels become critical. 60 hours, Mom said. 2.5 days. At current draw, less if we exert, less if we're scared and breathing hard. Cassidy was sitting on her cot, arms wrapped around her knees, watching us. She hadn't spoken since we'd come back from the surface. Now she did. "So we have to go out there again." "Yes," I said. "We have to go out there again." I didn't sleep. None of us did, though we lay on our cots in the dark after Earl killed the overhead lights at 1 a.m. The environmental panel's status LEDs painted the ceiling in amber and green. The audio monitor was turned low but not off. We could hear them moving on the hillside. Multiple now. At least 3, based on the overlapping footfalls. One of them returned to the sealed intake periodically. We heard it crouch there, breathing against the cap, then moving away, then returning. A pattern, a routine. It was learning that this spot had once produced something interesting, and it was checking back. At 4 a.m., I gave up pretending to rest. I sat at the workbench with the ventilation schematic and Earl's calculations, and I ran the numbers again. Not because I doubted his math, because I needed to see it in my own hand. The truth was worse than I'd presented it. 3 operational intakes with the raised extensions were managing airflow adequately, but the exhaust vent was still outputting concentrated CO2 at ground level. Every hour, we were laying a scent trail that pointed directly to the hillside where our entrance was concealed. The 3 modified intakes had reduced their own sound signature, yes, but the exhaust was doing more damage than all 4 intakes combined. We'd fixed the whistle. We hadn't fixed the smell. And I'd known. On the surface, when I'd chosen to leave the 4th intake and skip the exhaust entirely, I'd made a tactical calculation. Time versus risk. Cassidy's safety versus system completeness. And I'd chosen to come back with the job undone, because a single slow-moving figure had started walking in our general direction. Had that been the right call, or had I been afraid? Earl appeared beside me. He moved quietly for a man his size always had. He set 2 mugs of cold instant coffee on the bench and sat. "You're running the numbers." "The exhaust is the problem. It always was." "I know. I knew before you went up." He wrapped both hands around his mug. "I let you go thinking 3 intakes would solve it because I needed you to come back. If you'd known the exhaust was the real priority, you'd have stayed up longer, taken more risk. I stared at him. You sent me out with incomplete information. Yes. To protect me. Yes. Earl, you can't. I stopped, took a breath. This is exactly the thing. This is what you always do. You make the decision for other people because you've already run the scenario and decided you know what's best. I usually do know what's best. You designed a nuclear bunker for a zombie apocalypse. The words came out harder than I intended. In the silence that followed, I heard Cassidy shift on her cot, awake, listening. Earl set down his mug. You're right. I don't want to be right. I want to be alive in 3 days. And for that to happen, I need to go back up there tomorrow and install that exhaust diffuser. And I need to know everything you know. Every number, every risk, every calculation. Not the version you think I can handle. The real version. He was quiet for a long time. Then, the real version is that I've been building this shelter for 22 years. 4 with you. 18 before, and I never once modeled for what's happening above us right now. Every assumption I made was wrong, not partially wrong, foundationally wrong. The threat model, the timeline, the failure modes, all of it. That's what I needed to hear. Why? Because I've been telling myself you knew. That somewhere in this system was a contingency for this. That because you were Earl, because you'd spent 50 years preparing, there was a layer I hadn't seen. A backup plan. Something brilliant hidden in the design. There isn't. I know. And that means we solve this together. Not your architecture, maintained by my hands. Our problem. Solved in real time. He nodded, slowly. And something in his posture changed a tension releasing that I realized had been there for days. Not the fear of the things outside. The fear of being exposed. Of having his life's work revealed as inadequate. Of watching me, his apprentice, see the flaws he'd always seen and never fixed. Okay, he said. Together. What do you need? I need to know about the foundation drains. His eyebrows rose. What about them? The bunker sits in a hillside. You engineered drainage to prevent hydrostatic pressure on the walls. Where does that drainage go? French drain system. Perforated pipe around the footings, gravity fed to a discharge point. He stopped. His eyes went wide. Where does it discharge, Earl? 200 yards downhill, into the same drainage swale as the O. As the road culvert, south side, near the tunnel exit. He stood up. His hands were on the schematic before I finished speaking. If we tie the exhaust into the foundation drain, he said, his voice changing now, energized. We don't need ductwork. We don't need the escape tunnel. The drain is already below grade, already concealed, already carrying water away from us. We add our CO2 exhaust to the drain flow, and it exits 200 yards away, diffused by water vapor, at ground level in a drainage swale that's downhill from us. And downhill means downwind in this valley. Prevailing airflow carries it away. The modification point is inside the shelter, he said. The drain access cleanout is... He pointed at the floor. Under the southwest corner, under my cot. I smiled. It felt strange on my face. No surface exposure needed. No surface exposure needed. For the first time since 2 a.m. the night before, Earl smiled back. It wasn't relief. It was something more precise. The satisfaction of solving the right problem with the tools already in the room. Engineering, finally, for the threat that existed rather than the one he'd spent his life imagining. We cut into the floor at 7 a.m. Earl's cot was moved. The concrete was 4 inches thick at that point, non-structural, poured as a finished floor over the gravel drainage layer beneath. The battery drill with a masonry bit got us through in minutes, and below that, the French drain pipe ran exactly where the drawing showed it. A 4-inch perforated PVC line sitting in a bed of gravel, carrying the slow seep of hillside groundwater toward its discharge point. The modification was elegant in its simplicity. We cut a port into the drain pipe, fitted a reduction coupling from the 12-inch exhaust duct to the 4-inch drain line, and sealed every joint. The CO2-enriched exhaust would now mix with groundwater, dissolve partially, and exit the drain 200 yards downhill as a faint gas diffused over a wide, wet area. It wasn't perfect. Some CO2 would off-gas along the drain's path, potentially attracting attention to the general hillside. But the concentration would be orders of magnitude lower than the direct vent output, and the prevailing downhill airflow would carry it away from us rather than pooling at our entrance. We finished by 9 a.m. Earl sealed the floor patch with hydraulic cement, and I ran the environmental systems through a full restart cycle. Fans up. Intake draw 3 vents, operational pulling clean air through the raised, flared extensions. Exhaust cycling down through the foundation drain. No ground-level output, no whistle, no CO2 plume pointing at our door. The system hummed. Different now, deeper, quieter. Like a machine that had found its correct operating mode after years of running slightly wrong. Airflow rates? Earl asked. I checked the panel. 68% of design capacity. CO2 holding at 0.03%. Scrubber running efficiently. Canister draw is manageable. Sustainable? Indefinitely. At current consumption rates, assuming the 3 surface intakes remain clear. He sat back on his relocated cot and exhaled. Then he did something I'd never seen him do. He lay down in the middle of the day, pulled a blanket over his chest, and closed his eyes. "Wake me if anything changes," he said. He was asleep in 2 minutes. 74 years old. 22 years building. 6 years teaching me. And in the end, the system worked not because of what he'd planned, but because of what he'd poured into the ground for drainage. A feature so basic, so structural, so invisible that he'd never considered it as anything other than infrastructure. I sat at the monitoring station and watched the cameras. The figures in the yard were still. Daylight passive mode. 14 of them now, scattered across the property like dropped chess pieces. Cassidy sat beside me. She'd been quiet all morning, watching us work, handing us tools when asked. Now she spoke. "How long can we really stay down here?" "As long as the intakes are clear and the water holds out. Months, maybe." "And if they find the intakes, the raised ones?" "They'd have to climb 4 feet of smooth pipe. And even then, the flared opening is too wide for them to block with their bodies. We engineered it to be unobstructable." "You keep saying we. You and Earl." "Yeah. You've been building this with him since you were 14. "Yeah. And you never told us. Not me, not Mom." I turned from the monitors. Her face wasn't angry. It was something quieter and more corrosive. The look of someone recalculating every interaction, every summer visit, every casual mention of helping Grandpa with a project. Realizing all of it was this. All of it was preparation for the end of the world, and she'd been excluded from the knowing. He asked me not to tell. "And you just didn't?" "I was 14, Cass. He was my grandfather." He asked, and I said yes. "You were 14 once. You were 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. 6 summers. You could have told me any of those years." She was right. And the reason I hadn't the real reason, underneath the promise, was something I wasn't sure I could say out loud. Because the secrecy hadn't just been Earl's request. It had become ours. The thing that bonded us. The project, the knowledge, the shared understanding of what might come. It was the substance of our relationship. Telling Cassidy would have diluted it, would have made it ordinary. I'd kept my sister ignorant to preserve something precious between me and an old man. "I'm sorry," I said. "I should have told you." "You should have taught me, the way he taught you. I could have helped." "I know. I want to learn now." I looked at the schematics still spread across the workbench, at the tools, at the environmental panel with its gauges and valves that I understood intimately because a man had spent 6 years making sure I would. "Okay," I said. "Grab a pencil." I taught Cassidy the systems over the next 2 days. Not the surface components, we weren't going back up yet, but everything internal. The water recirculation, the electrical panel and its battery bank, the propane management, the CO2 monitors, the radio stack, every valve, every switch, every gauge, what it measured, what normal looked like, what danger looked like. She learned fast, faster than I had at 14. But then her motivation was different. I'd learned because Earl was my hero and the work was exciting. She learned because the air she was breathing depended on understanding the machine that provided it. Mom watched us, said little. She was processing something larger, not the systems, but the years. The realization that her father and her son had shared a life she'd been locked out of. That every summer she'd sent me to Oregon, grateful for the free childcare and the male influence. She'd been unknowingly contributing to an enterprise that assumed the world would end. On the 3rd day underground, she asked Earl the question I'd been waiting for. "Did you ever plan to tell me?" He was at the radio, scanning frequencies. The ham channels were almost silent now. The methodical broadcaster had gone off air 16 hours ago and hadn't returned. The state emergency loop had changed its message. "Evacuation corridors are being established. Remain sheltered. Do not travel on foot. Further instructions will follow." "I planned to tell you when it mattered," he said without turning. "It matters now. Which is why you're here." "I'm here because my 20-year-old son knew the way in. Not because you trusted me with the knowledge." Earl set down the radio handset. He turned on his stool and faced his daughter. In the bunker's flat light, they looked alike in ways I'd never noticed, topside, the same jawline, the same way they held their shoulders when they were preparing to be honest about something difficult. "I didn't trust the information with anyone who might talk about it," he said. "Not because I didn't trust you, Laura. Because I didn't trust the world to leave us alone if it knew. If your coworkers knew, if your neighbors knew, if your ex-husband knew. So you trusted a child?" "I trusted a child who could keep a secret and swing a hammer. Yes." Mom sat down across from him. "And if you'd died before this? Heart attack, stroke, accident? We'd never have known." "There's a letter in my safety deposit box with the location, the access codes, and the instruction manual." "A letter?" "A detailed letter. Earl, I did what I could with what I had. I'm not apologizing for saving your life with an imperfect process." Mom's mouth tightened. Then she nodded. Once, not acceptance, acknowledgement. The argument would continue. But not today. Not while the cameras showed 19 figures standing in the yard above them. 19. Growing. 7 more than when we'd entered. The bunker was invisible now. No sound, no scent, no signal. The modified systems had rendered us undetectable. but the property itself was accumulating them, like a basin filling with rain. They came and they stopped and they stayed. "Why here?" Cassidy asked, looking at the monitors. "There's nothing drawing them anymore. Why do they keep coming?" "Maybe they remember," Earl said. "The first ones came when we were still broadcasting the whistle, the exhaust. They came because we called them. And now they stay because this is where they came. And the new ones come because the old ones are here." "Herd behavior," I said. "Something like it." "So, even though we've fixed the attraction problem, the population just grows? Because it's already started?" Earl didn't answer. He didn't need to. The cameras answered for him. 19 figures, motionless in gray daylight, occupying the space above us with the permanence of geology. We'd made ourselves invisible. But we'd done it too late. The herd was already here. And the herd would only grow on day 5, I told them. Not about the exhaust fix or the intake modifications. They knew those. I told them the thing I'd been carrying since the first hour, the thing that had shaped every decision, every surface trip, every late-night calculation. The blast door isn't rated for sustained force. We were eating dinner canned soup heated on the propane burner, bread from the stores, powdered milk mixed in steel cups. Cassidy looked up first. Earl set down his spoon. "Explain," Mom said. "The door is designed to withstand a pressure wave. A single, massive, instantaneous force, then nothing. It's not designed for continuous low-level assault. Repeated impacts, sustained pushing." "How do you know?" Cassidy asked. "Because I helped hang it. The frame is bolted into the concrete surround. The bolts are rated for shear force in one direction outward. A blast wave pushes outward. These things would push inward. The shear rating in that direction is about 40% of the outward spec." 40% is still, Mom started. 40% of 15 psi is 6 psi, roughly 9,000 pounds per square foot. One of those things can't generate that. 10 of them can't, but I looked at the camera feed. 23 figures now. If enough of them pile against it, if they lean, if the mass accumulates. "What number?" Earl asked. His voice was quiet, not surprised. "I ran it last night. At their approximate body weight and assuming pure compression, no dynamic force, just dead weight. Leaning the door frame fails at approximately 4,000 pounds of sustained inward pressure. That's maybe 25 to 30 bodies packed against it." "We have 23 on the surface now," Cassidy said. "And growing." The room was silent. The dehumidifier hummed. The ventilation fans whispered their eternal breath. "You knew this from the start," Earl said. "Not accusation, recognition." "I knew it when you opened the door. I've known since I was 16, and you explained the bolt specifications." "Why didn't you say something then?" "Because in a nuclear scenario, there's nothing outside to push. Overpressure comes once and passes. The door was perfect for what you built it for. I didn't bring it up because there was nothing to bring up. Until now. Until now." Mom looked between us. "So, what does this mean? Are we in danger?" "Not today. Probably not this week. They'd have to find the entrance first, which means getting past the rhododendron screen, down the stairwell, and stacking against the door in enough numbers. During the day, they're passive. At night, they're active but haven't shown any interest in the hillside entrance since we silenced the systems." "But if they do find it," Cassidy said. "If they find it, and if enough of them crowd into the stairwell and lean, the frame bolts will eventually shear and the door will fail inward." "How long would that take? Once they started?" Earl answered this one. He'd been doing his own math, I could tell. Hours, maybe a full day. The bolts would fatigue gradually. We'd hear it, the metal creaking, the concrete cracking. We'd have warning. Warning to do what? Mom asked. There's nowhere to go. The tunnel is compromised. The tunnel has something at its exit, I said. One thing, maybe two, not 30. If the door fails, the tunnel is still a better option than staying. Crawling 300 yards through a tube toward something that's already there? Toward one or two, rather than 30 behind us. Yes. This was the truth of the bunker. All of it laid out. No hidden layer, no secret contingency, no brilliant Earl plan waiting to be revealed. Just a beautiful structure built for the wrong war, adapted on the fly by people who knew its bones, approaching a threshold that was arithmetic, not drama. The thing about engineering is that failure isn't sudden. It's predicted. You can calculate exactly when a bolt will shear, how many cycles of fatigue a joint can withstand, what load a frame will bear before it yields. There's no mystery in structural failure, only numbers marching toward a known conclusion. We had a known conclusion, somewhere between 30 and 40 bodies against the door, and the count on the surface was rising by 3 to 4 per day. So we need to leave, Cassidy said. Eventually, yes. When? I looked at Earl. He looked at the cameras, at his shelter, at 22 years of work and hope and precision, built against the wrong ending. Before the number reaches critical, he said, which means before they find the door. And if we leave, Mom said, where do we go? The radio chose that moment to break its silence. Not the ham frequencies, those had been dead for hours. The state emergency broadcast. The loop had changed again. A new message, crisper, more urgent. Evacuation corridor Charlie 7 is active. Highway 138 east to Diamond Lake. Military checkpoint at milepost 54. Corridor is secured between 0600 and 1800 hours daily. Civilian survivors are directed to proceed on foot during daylight only. Bring identification. Bring no weapons. Corridor closes permanently in 72 hours. 72 hours. 3 days. Highway 138 was 8 miles from Earl's property. We spent the night planning. Earl spread a topographic map on the workbench, USGS quad sheet, marked in his hand with property boundaries, trails, water sources. The route from the property to Highway 138 was 8 miles of timber company land. Gravel roads, fire breaks, 1 creek crossing. In normal times, I could hike it in 3 hours. These are not normal times, Mom said. No, but the broadcast said the corridor is secured during daylight. That means military presence on the highway itself. We just need to reach it. Through 8 miles of forest, past however many of them are between here and there. During the day, I said, when they're passive. They were passive 5 days ago. They might have changed. She was right to push. We'd been underground for 5 days. Everything we knew about their behavior was 5 days old. The methodical broadcaster was gone. The ham networks were dead. We had one data source, our cameras, which showed our property only. I'll go first, I said. Scout the route, alone, fast. If it's clear, I come back and we all go together the next day. No, Earl said. Immediate, flat. Earl, no. We go together or we don't go. I am not watching you leave on a screen and waiting to see if you come back. If I don't scout, we're taking Mom and Cass into unknown territory with no intel. Then we go slowly and scout as we travel. We leave at first light. We move together. We take 8 hours if we need 8 hours. The corridor is open until 6 p.m. And if we encounter them on the road, then we go around, or we go through, or we turn back. But we do it as 4. I looked at Mom, at Cassidy. They both nodded. Okay, I said. Together. We packed through the night. Light loads water, food for 2 days, basic medical, the radio. No weapons. The broadcast had specified no weapons at the checkpoint. Earl resisted this. They can't enforce what they don't see, he said. They can turn us away if we're carrying. And if we're turned away 8 miles from here with night coming, fine, no weapons. At 5 a.m., Earl powered down the bunker systems. One by one, ventilation off, dehumidifier off, lights off. The silence that followed was total. We stood in the dark with our packs and listened to the absence of the machine that had kept us alive for 5 days. Leave the door open? Cassidy asked. Earl was quiet for a moment. Yes, leave it open. If we need to come back, I want to be able to get in fast. And if they get in while we're gone, then there's nothing left here worth protecting. He said it simply. 22 years. 4 summers of my labor alongside his. Every dollar of his pension that didn't go to food. And he dismissed it in one sentence, because the people it was built for were no longer inside it. We opened the inner door, then the outer. Dawn light, pale, cold, thin, fell down the stairwell. The air above smelled of damp earth and fir needles and that faint, sweet wrongness that hadn't faded. I went up first, through the rhododendron screen, onto the hillside. The yard below held 26 figures, all still, all passive in the early light, distributed without pattern across the grass and gravel. Clear, I whispered. Stay low. Follow me. Don't stop. Cassidy came next, then Mom, then Earl, last, pulling the outer door closed behind him. Not locked, not sealed, just resting in its frame. His hand lingered on the steel for 1 second. Then he released it and followed us uphill. We moved north along the tree line, away from the property, climbing toward the logging road that would connect to the network of graveled tracks leading east to 138. The figures in the yard didn't turn, didn't follow. 26 shapes in gray dawn light, unaware or indifferent to 4 people slipping away through the trees. At the ridgeline, I looked back. Earl's property lay below house, garage, workshop, garden. The bunker entrance invisible beneath its screen of green. All of it untouched. All of it populated now by things that had come because we'd called them without knowing, and stayed because staying was all they knew how to do. Earl stood beside me. He didn't look back. Forward, he said. Don't look back. We walked east into the growing light. We reached Highway 138 at 11:40 a.m. 4 hours, 20 minutes. We encountered 9 of them on the logging roads, all passive in daylight, all avoidable by giving wide berth. One turned its head as we passed. None followed. The military checkpoint at milepost 54 was real. Soldiers in MOPP gear behind concrete barriers, processing a line of 60 or 70 people. They took our names. They checked our IDs. They put us on a bus with blackout curtains and drove east. Earl sat beside me. He said nothing for the first hour. Then, as the bus ground through a mountain pass and the engine whined against the grade, he spoke. You'll build the next one. What? The next shelter, somewhere. When this is over and there's ground to build on. You'll do it right. You know what I got wrong. You didn't get it wrong. You got it right for what you knew. I got it beautiful for what I feared. You'll get it ugly for what exists. That's better. That's always better. He closed his eyes, leaned against the window, slept. I sat with his words and watched the curtain sway with the road's rhythm. Outside, a world I couldn't see moved past in silence. And I carried, somewhere beneath my sternum, the strange lightness of having helped build something magnificent that couldn't save us, and the heavier, stranger pride of having broken it apart and rebuilt it, imperfect and graceless, into something that did.